Alright, so right now I'm going to go over my leadership philosophy, and Gunther is here to cross-examine it once we're done. So for me personally, my leadership philosophy is more an emotional or people-related philosophy. I think it's more than just being in charge of people or trying to strive towards a common goal. I think it's more, instead of it being hands-on, it's really, leadership is intangible. And there's so many different aspects that go into being a leader and into leadership themselves. Some of these things are confidence, empathy, humility, creativity, and there's so many more that can go into this. It's also about being there for your people so that they trust you and that you know you can trust them in order to accomplish what you are setting out to do. Um, One thing about leadership is that it's, for me personally, I think you always need to realize that there's a dark side to leadership. You need to understand that you may think that what you're doing is good leadership. However, if you're not being self-aware, then you're going to end up making mistakes that might end up losing the trust of your people or making mistakes that could have worse consequences. Um, Being aware of these scenarios or situations can really help, however, and they can make you a better leader in the end. That way you can learn from your mistakes and figure out how to work with your people in order to prevent them from happening again. So being a leader, another part of my leadership philosophy is also about being a mentor versus just, someone in charge. I think it's about leading by example and emulating everything that you believe. So if you believe in being compassionate and making a difference in someone's life, you should hold yourself and your people to those standards. You should always um, basically keep your morals and use those to drive your leadership situations. Um, it's also about sacrificing and being dedicated to not only the mission at hand, but also to your people. So mission first, people always. And it's something that can only be, I believe, my philosophy is that you can only achieve this great leadership through hard work. You can sometimes you can sometimes groom it through like learning about leadership and reading it stuff, but I think it's mostly experiences that are going to really grow you as a leader and improve your leadership ability. So before I go into my application plan and how I actually work in leadership settings and apply my leadership philosophy in real life, I just wanted to touch on some points that I talked about in my leadership philosophy. So one of those was the dark side of leadership, and that's something that is very taboo. It's very hard to talk about because when you think of leadership and being a leader, you think of someone who makes all the right decisions, who you can look up to, and who is someone that is very highly praised. However, there's a dark side, and it's where basically you could be thinking that you're making all the right decisions and being a great leader, but you're making mistakes left and right, you're making immoral decisions, and there's a few different aspects that could surface as the dark side of leadership, and you won't even realize it. So one of those things that you won't realize is being a yes leader, which is basically no matter what the task is or how hard it is, how time consuming, anything like that, you're gonna say yes. Even if it's like, oh, I need you to build 300 and something things in 2 days, and you're just like, yes, we can do it, because you want to please and you want to show that your team and yourself can do whatever task is thrown at you. However, that's something where, one, your people are not going to be able to do that. It was obvious from the start that it wasn't something that you can actually accomplish, but you said yes anyway because you want to be that motivated leader. However, that's one of those things where that's going to be the dark side, where you're not going to make the correct decision. And another thing is also being a figurehead. So instead of actually being a leader and making the decisions yourself, you're kind of just there. You're the person that everybody's going to look at, but you don't have your own original ideas. You're kind of just being fed information or fed ideas or fed the decisions, and you're just making it known. And that's something where it's like that's not leadership at all. You're not really doing anything on your own or anything to help your people. You're just doing what you're told and being the face for whatever decision is being made. So going back to the immoral decisions, you could yourself be thinking that you are making a great decision and doing whatever is best for that, whatever you think is best for your people, for your company, your country, whatever situation that you're in. Um, but everybody else might see it as you're hurting your people, or the decisions against the majority's morals, instead of, it might not be against yours, but everybody else, they could be completely against it, but as a leader you're still going to be trying to tell them, yes, we can do this, yes, we can do that, and um, it's not going to be very ethical. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk about emotional intelligence. So for emotional intelligence, there's a few key concepts that go into that I think that I really believe in, and really stick out in my leadership philosophy. So the first one's going to be empathy. So that's basically being able to, instead of just saying it's the difference between um, saying that you understand how someone else feels and actually putting yourself in their shoes. So it's the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy, you're sorry for that person, you wish you could help in some way. Empathy is really being like I know you're going through this, or I know you're in the situation, but like I know how you feel. Like I've been in the same situation. I think that's really important in leadership, and especially to my leadership philosophy, because I think you really need to know your people before you can lead them. Once you actually know your people, you can understand what leadership they need the most. So different maybe training aspects, or similar things to that. And you really want to build that trust between them, and make sure your people know that even though you may be the leader of the group, you're still approachable, and that they can still come up to you if they have a problem, or if they have a question about anything that you're doing, or if they need to talk to you about any of the decisions that you've made. So the next thing would be compassion. It's and compassion is going to go into really taking into account how your people are doing, how they're feeling, and their own ideas, and actually valuing your people themselves, instead of just being someone that's like, okay, like I'll know this about you, but that's kind of it. It's actually checking up on them, making sure they're doing okay, and motivating them to be better, and to help them be better, instead of just saying, okay, well, you're doing your thing, cool, whatever. Um, Next thing is self-awareness. You really need to be cognizant of your own leadership ability, and how the decisions you make are going to impact the overall outcome, how they're going to interact with your people, or how they're going to affect your people, um, and basically just knowing what you're doing, and knowing how you're doing it, how you're coming off to your followers, how you're presenting your entire team. The last thing is humility. So with humility, instead of being a leader where you're like, oh, I'm so great, like our team does this and that, and like we're the best, having a little bit of humility is being like, okay, we did this thing that was really great, but what can we do to be better? So basically, not putting yourself on the pedestal, just doing your own thing, and always knowing that there's room for improvement, and that with a big head, you're not going to be able to fit through a door to accomplish new tasks, for a terrible metaphor. Um, but basically, it's knowing that even though you're doing great things, or if you are doing great things, it's knowing that there's always a time where you're going to make mistakes, and you need to be able to have that humility, and be able to admit when you make a mistake and what the mistake was. That way you can learn from it and move on. So next I'm going to talk about creativity and innovation. I think that's one of the, it's a huge thing for my leadership philosophy, because you basically want to, instead of thinking directly outside of the box, you want to think either inside a different box, or come up with ideas that are completely out there, something that no one would have thought of, even if it seems absolutely ridiculous. One of the biggest things when it comes to creativity and innovation is asking for forgiveness versus asking for permission. So if there's a task at hand that you have to do, and you have this outrageous idea on how to get it done, and you think it'll work, instead of asking all these questions like, oh, can we do this, can we do that, it's just making the decision, going with it, and basically finding out what will happen if you do it, because it might work, and if you had asked for permission, it might have been shot down. even though it might have been the best way to accomplish the task. It's also incorporating more than one idea. Instead of just finding one idea and sticking with it, it would be maybe taking two ideas and putting them together, or finding one idea and then using some other ideas for a backup plan. Something that if plan A doesn't work, plan B will come back in, or it could be plan C, D, E, all the way through the alphabet. As many outrageous ideas that you might be able to come up with. Um, Also, it includes asking other points of view instead of just coming up with an idea yourself and not taking into anybody else's ideas into account. It would be asking for more ideas. Maybe someone else will come up with something that you never thought of, and it works better than your idea. But there's also that fine line between taking too many suggestions and not taking enough. So it's kind of a balance that you have to work with. Um, but it's always best to have at least more than one idea coming in order to find that creativity and accomplish this task in a new way that nobody has ever seen before. So now I'm going to talk about my application plan and basically the way I actually apply my leadership philosophy to different leadership situations. So my first step is basically set milestones or goals. So when you first are presented with a problem, I think it's a good idea to um, basically set milestones of where you want to be in, like if it's a very long task, then where you want to be in 2 days, in 3 days, in 4 days. And for goals, I think you should set like halfway goals and then basically end of the task goals. So basically you have this overall goal that you're trying to reach, and then you have a halfway goal. So something that you can basically that will tell you when you get to halfway, when you've accomplished that halfway point. And then the milestones along the way are basically kind of like little motivators, but also helping you keep track of where you are and what your progress is. So the next thing would be to create ideas in order to accomplish this task at hand. And you want to come up with ideas that aren't boring, something that's going to be new, creative, and innovative. So the next step would be mission first, people always. So that's something that can be incorporated into all the steps, but it just happens to be the third one, this one. So the mission first, people always is always focus on what you're trying to accomplish and the goal that you set for yourself and your team, but you always want to keep into account the people that you have working with you and working under you in order to make sure that they're okay enough to accomplish this task, or just to basically ensure that trust between you and your people. So the next one, the next step in my application plan is to set a mindset. So when you start a task, you want to have a positive mindset, saying like we will get this done, we will reach these milestones and these goals that we're setting, and we will be able to. So the next step in my application plan is to set a mindset. So when you go into a task, you want to have a positive mindset and basically a very motivated attitude, saying like, yes, we're going to accomplish these goals, we're going to hit these milestones, and we're going to be able to do it together. I think mindset is really important to how you accomplish the goal and how well you accomplish the goal, because if you have a very negative mindset when you start, it's going to be very hard to accomplish those goals and to get your people motivated in order to work at the progress rate that you want them to. The next step would be to focus on what's important, so your ideals, your morals, in order to avoid running into the dark side of leadership or falling into different scenarios or situations that might end up hindering your progress on a task, or that might hindering your trust with your people. So the next thing would be something that is fondly referred to as the OODA loop. So it's observe, orient, decide, and act. So basically it's observing the problem and just realizing what you have to do. Orient is trying to figure out how you're going to do it, what materials you need, anything that's going to help you reach that goal in the end. Then decide. So you want to make the decision and have your backup plan. So you're going to want to say, we're going to do this, and if this doesn't work, we're going to do this and this. Then you're going to act. So you're basically going to go forth with the decision that you made and see what happens and see if it works. It's called a loop because if it doesn't work, you're going to start over from the beginning and observe what went wrong, how to fix it, and how to do it next time. Maybe go with plan B, plan C, etc. So the next step is going to be attention to detail, you always want to make sure that you're paying attention to all the little things that are going into this task, because if you miss one small thing, um, it could completely basically break your task in the end. It could be one small thing where if you had done it, you would have accomplished your task either faster, better, or if it might even hinder you from accomplishing your task at all. So the next step is more of an acting step. So you want to perform as a team. You want to be able to delegate and give your people tasks so that everyone is involved, and also everyone has basically their own little thing that they're in charge of, their own thing that they are being a leader for. And you want to work together as a team to accomplish each of their little goals, which will end up accomplishing all of your goals. Next would be to critique what happened. So this also goes into the OODA loop, but you want to critique and go over the pros of how you got to your goal accomplished, the cons, what you need to work on, what you need to improve on, and just how to do it better. And the last step in my application plan is to basically be liquid. If something doesn't go according to plan, it's not something that should break your entire team or leadership or anything like that. It should be something where you're like, okay, it didn't work, we're just going to try it again. So you want to be able to be malleable and adjust your situation and ideas accordingly to what had happened. Okay, now we're going to do the question and answer session. Then Gunther's going to ask me the questions about my leadership philosophy.
All right, start off. When you were talking about your philosophy, you talked about the emotional side, and I was just wondering, why are you so invested in the emotional side of leadership?
I'm invested in the emotional side of leadership because I think to be a better leader, or to be a good leader in general, you have to be open instead of just being a closed off, like no emotion kind of person. Because I think sometimes when you're in a leadership role, you forget that the people that you're leading are also human. They're also people, and they're going to have feelings and opinions that are going to differ and change based on the decisions that you make or the decisions that are made by the majority or anything like that. So I think being emotional or um, having that emotional side to your leadership and being able to recognize that they are human, that they are going to respond the same way to something, or relatively the same way that you would respond to something. I think it's a good way to learn about your people, learn how they work, and find out what leadership they react to the best.
All right, good stuff. How do you practically apply creativity in a leadership situation? Because you talked about that, and you just sort of mentioned it, and in the application, in the philosophy, and just sort of glossed over that.
So to practically apply creativity in a leadership situation, I think it's really just coming up with an idea that hasn't been thought of before. So, for example, I've done a leadership project where there's 3 different size boxes, and there's a small box, a medium box, and a big box. And basically, the task is to get your entire group in to be able to stand in every single box for like 30 seconds each, or like 10 seconds each, whatever the time was. And instead of being like, okay, well, we're all gonna sit here and put our heels in the box, and then we're gonna put our heels in the smaller box, or the medium box, and then the smaller box, because that's what that's the kind of like the general idea that always gets brought up. Well, a new idea that was brought up, and a new creative outside the box idea, because box is funny, would be to just pick up the tape that made the boxes and made one giant box. Instead of having 3 little small boxes, you have one giant box, and everybody just stands in there for a collective amount of time, and ta-da, you accomplish the task. And it was something that it was a very easy way to accomplish the task, and nobody would have thought of it before, because everyone's like, oh, we have to do this, this, and this, instead of being like, well, why are we limiting ourselves to these guidelines? So I think to practically apply creativity is basically break those boundaries and not limit yourself based on previous experiences or previous ideas that have basically been used in the same situation.
Where do you define the boundaries then?
I think defining the boundaries would be maybe not necessarily going with some completely outrageous idea that seems totally impossible, but just something that you wouldn't normally think of. So I guess like the boundary would be the difference between basically a safety net and going on a tightrope. So the tightrope would be like the new idea that you're not completely sure of, but you want to take that chance just to see what happens. And then the safety net would be like, well, I know for sure this works. I know it'll get done. And I know we'll be able to reach the goal that we set out. I think going on the tightrope is going to give you more ability to grow. So basically pushing those boundaries is going to be a better idea. And the boundary itself, like the actual line between the two, is very hard to see because you don't want to come up with some completely outrageous, maybe even dangerous idea. So it's kind of just understanding what limitations your team has as a whole and then working around those limitations.
All right. Okay, so you talked about the dark side of leadership, and I was just wondering, as a follower, how do you address the dark side of leadership?
As a follower, I think you would just need to be able to bring it up to your leader. If you see that whoever's leading you is making decisions that are morally unethical or are representing the dark side of leadership, something that you know that you shouldn't be doing, or the entirety of your team agrees with you, as in they don't think that these are going to be the best ways to accomplish something or anything like that. I think it would just be voicing your opinion, being able to be comfortable enough with your leader to be able to be like, hey, I think we should take a step back and reevaluate. Is this going along with our morals? Is this still the original idea that we wanted to do? Is this still basically are we still on the right track? Instead of just going with it and letting the leader do what they want, I think as a follower you would really have to address it and bring it to their attention, because most of the time the leader's not going to realize that they're making these bad decisions or that they're in this place until somebody brings it up to them. Then they'll start noticing it. You can even get other followers to help you back it up and maybe come up with solutions to this situation.
So, what if you find out as a follower your leader decided to be on the track for the dark side of leadership instead of accidentally found themselves there?
I think if it was a conscious decision, then I think you and the rest of the followers should basically reevaluate if that's someone you really do want to lead. And if it's not, then I think it'd be something where someone else should step up, and either you or someone else should step up and be like, hey, I don't think you're ready for this job anymore. And I know in some situations, depending on the hierarchy that you're in, it might be difficult to do that, but sometimes you might have to go over their head. I think bringing it up to them first and be like, hey, we noticed that you decided this, and see if they what their justification for it is first. And if it's something where for a fact, with their justification and everything, that they made the conscious decision to make these choices, I think that's when you should basically go over the head, or get together as a team of followers and basically make the leaders step down. Because if it's someone that you or no one else wants to be led by, then I think it's something that you would have to be able to address, and that someone else would have to assume that role in order to prevent these decisions from keeping made.
Gotcha. Okay. So with your leadership model, it seems like you're getting really close to your followers. And how do you define the line between being a peer and being a leader?
I think setting basically a balance of power, empowering your people to be able to make those decisions and come up to you with any problems, but also setting a standard, saying this is what I expect out of you, and basically having an information train. Before any decision is made, they would still have to go through you, so you would still be making the final decision. And having a command presence in the situation, making it known that you are the one that is going to make the final decision. If something isn't being done, that you are the one that's going to bring about the repercussions or the consequences. Basically establishing that balanced power, and showing that while you are there for your people, and that they should feel comfortable coming up to you, but they still have to understand that you are the one in charge, and you are the one that's going to make the final decision, have the final say.
Sounds good. Okay. How do you determine the goals that you want to accomplish? You mentioned it in your application plan, how you set goals, but how do you determine which goals to set?
I think that first you have to basically evaluate the task at hand and discuss like how you want to get to the task and what you want that final product to be, whether be like making a building or like writing paper or something like that. I think it's setting basically having a final idea of what you're expecting once you finish, and not only just making the goal on your own, getting feedback from your not your peers, your followers, and just ask them um, like this is where I want us to be. This is what I'm expecting once we finish, and see if they have the same kind of like similar ideas, and if not, they can always be like, well, what if we had this as well or this as well, and then you can start setting goals along the way. But basically establishing like what you want your final outcome to be. So setting that actual like maybe not a visual idea, but a set idea of what you want from the task.
All right. Okay. So, you talked about how you needed a set of mindset in your application. How do you transfer that mindset set to your followers?
I think it's all from leading by example. So coming in as a leader and being really motivated and positive and saying like that you're really excited to work and that you just like you're expecting great things and all this stuff. I think that's going to be the best way to set that mindset among your followers, that you have to lead by example and be the one to set the mindset first. That way when they come in, they'll see like, okay, like my leader is, they're motivated, they're positive, they're ready to go. Like maybe I should also be the same way, and like also as a leader setting those standards, be not necessarily saying like I want you to be happy every day, but saying like even though you might have days that suck, like I expect you, or I want you to find like the silver lining or one good thing out of the day. Basically setting a mindset that you want and that you think would work well for everybody, but showing them how the mindset is going to work and showing them what it looks like so that way they can emulate it.
So you mentioned that there might not be always a good day. How do you maintain that mindset for yourself and your followers?
So for myself personally, it would be the same idea, finding that one good thing out of the day, knowing that like even though today might have been a absolutely terrible day, you might feel like everything's just crashing down on you, that you still have a reset button. You can wake up the next day and try again, even though everything might have gone wrong. You know that, okay, you know what you need to fix, and then you can just come back knowing that tomorrow you have an entire other day to fix it. Even when deadlines are getting close, things like that, it's still something where if you find that like one good thing, even if it's really small, like somebody paid your parking meter for you or paid a little extra or something like that, something small throughout the day that you can just like hold on to, I think that would be a good way for you to basically set the mindset for yourself, and like just reminding your followers that like they are not, well, it's kind of like reminding them that they're appreciated, and that like even though they might have made a lot of mistakes today, but just let them know like, hey, like that's fine, just fix it, like mistakes are okay, just work on it and fix it tomorrow.
Okay. So you mentioned the OODA loop, and I felt like that was pretty interesting. It sort of reminded me of the AOR model that we discussed in class. Can you compare the two in any way?
Um, yeah, so the OODA loop and the AOR model, I feel that they're almost the same exact thing because it's the same idea. It's basically observing what the situation is, analyzing what it is, and figuring out like what you're gonna do, how you're gonna accomplish this task, and then also going back and either figuring out what went well and why it went well, or like why didn't it go well, what can we fix next time. It's like I said, it's basically the same thing. It's a whole process of finding a way to do something, acting on it, doing that thing, and then basically reflecting on it and trying to figure out like see if it'll work next time or for a different task, or basically just coming up with more ideas. Maybe you could do it a different way another time, or things like that.
Okay. So in your application example, you talked about the OODA loop, and then you talked about attention to detail, and then the delegation incorporated in the delegation. Shouldn't those be incorporated into the OODA loop anyway?
I think they are incorporated in the OODA loop. However, I think there are also some things that do get overlooked. When you're in the OODA loop, you're just kind of going through it. You're, like I said, observing, observing, and then deciding and acting. I think a lot of times when you're in that acting process and doing the task, I think a lot of the attention to details gets overlooked, and same with delegation. When you're doing these things and something's not going right, some leaders tend to have a habit of just wanting to do it themselves, and that takes away the delegation or the ability to delegate because like you're taking it all on yourself and not giving people anything to do. So I think they both get overlooked, and it's in the application plan. I wanted to have them as separate steps because I think they're good reminders to be like, okay, even though you're going through this OODA loop process, you should still have that attention to details because the smallest thing could completely ruin what you're doing. And same with delegation. You don't want to be the only one doing anything because one, you're one person. You can't accomplish every task on your own. Plus, delegating really gives your people something to do. That way, they all feel like they're actually part of the team. And separating those from the OODA loop will just basically remind you to keep in mind those things so that you can actually implement them and like along while you're doing the OODA loop.
All right. Well, those are all the questions I have. I feel like those answers were definitely more than adequate. And yeah, thanks.